Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for part 2 of a 12-part series as we journey chapter by chapter and epilogue and review through Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This is chapter 2, and what happened in chapter 2? Well, we begin with Tristan, who is 8 and sent off to visit relatives just in time for the fairy market to return. How strange. So he doesn't go, but his 7.5-year-old sister does, and she returns with a snow globe. I think we're going to have to keep an eye on that snow globe with which she returns, because it might be some type of magical doohickey because, well, Neil Gaiman. But Tristan, while he is not able to go, he does get something, a cat. That's right. They gift him the curse of a cat, which will not have magical implications because it escapes immediately. Or will it? The cat bolts for Never Never Land beyond the wall. Hey, Tristan and his sister, they don't get along. They hate each other. She's a bully, you see. Then Tristan falls in lust later in life. Falls in lust literally. And we get this from page 37. When he was 15, he hurt his arm falling from the apple tree outside Mr. Thomas Forrester's house. More specifically, from the apple tree outside Miss Victoria Forrester's bedroom window. To Tristan's regret, he had caught no more than a pink and tantalizing glimpse of Victoria, who was his sister's age and, without any doubt, the most beautiful girl for hundreds of miles around. Tristan has become a voyeur and a creep. That young lady whom Tristan was spying on then gets a job at a bar against her parents' wishes. One day, I think she's on the way from her job, she stops into Tristan's job. Tristan, I hate that name, works at a shop. And before Victoria leaves, Tristan says, hey, I'm about to get off, and you might need a big burly fella to walk you home. Tristan is not big or burly, nor did he say that. He just suggested that he walk her home, and she accepts. And on this walk, doing what any young man might do, Tristan decides he's going to propose. She neglects that proposal. She says no. And as she does, they witness a falling star. And Tristan says, I'll get you that, baby. If you were to marry me, I'd get you that fallen star. And she says, yeah, okay, pal. I'll marry you if you do that. And he says, really? And she says, yes. After a confrontation with his parents, Dunstan Thorne, who was the focus of chapter 1, has talks with the boy and agrees to let him leave for the east, where the star had fallen, to the east through ferry. Dunstan walks Tristan through the town and to the hole in wall, to the hole in the wall. It just depends on how you want to say it. And when the guards are confronted, Dunstan tells them, hey, pal, you've heard the stories about my son, right? Where he's from? And they say, well, we're not gossips, but we've heard rumblings. And Dunstan says, yeah. Well, it's time for him to go back. Not really sure what to do about this. The guards let him pass as Dunstan hands him, Tristan that is, as Dunstan hands Tristan, the snow glass he got from Tristan's mother on the night, who he got from the lady at the ferry market on the night of Dunstan's conception. Maybe. I don't know. But number one, on things to talk about, on page 49. This is just a little thing. We're going to pop in here real quick. Tristram Thorn ran all the way home. This was the moment I realized it's Tristram and not Tristan. I just wanted to throw that out there, and if anyone else is on that boat, in that boat, let me know. Another small thing coming to us from 46, as Tristram was promising Victoria all of these things he would do for her if she would marry him. He throws this in there. I would go to Africa and bring you diamonds the size of cricket balls. I didn't know crickets were hung. Moving on, 46. The first thing I'd like to point out on that page is this. As he is throwing around these proposals, Victoria says to him, "Marry you," she repeated incredulously. "And why ever should I marry you, Tristan Thorn? What could you give me?" Just like a woman, you know it. On the kissing page to that, 47, this coming from Tristram, "Kiss me," he pleaded. "There is nothing I would not do for your kiss. No mountain I would not scale, no river I would not ford, no desert I would not cross. Just like a simp." Moving on, the next thing I think that there is to talk about is along these lines. How would we deal with this if the genders were flipped? I think that this says a lot of things about the assumptions of gender culturally. What would we say if it was the young woman who were speaking to a man slightly younger than he and saying, "Hey, I would do anything because I am so sexually attracted to you. I would do anything just for a little bit of action." That would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? But how would it be if Tristram were this burly, sort of wide-shouldered, handsome fella in all of his masculine wares, all of the masculine wares with which he were born? Let's remember that. These are not things that he would have worked for. He's just so sexy. And he says to her, "I'm afraid not. I'm afraid we can't have any action because what would you have to offer me that I would deserve in all of my natural splendor? What job do you work that you would be able to give me all of the stuff that I deserve? Because, hey, baby, I was born hot." That's what's going on here. How would we treat that if it were coming from Tristram? I don't have to work. I don't have to deserve. I'm hot. You owe me things in order to be exposed to this hotness. It's a very strange thing. But along these lines, these expectations of Tristram, "Victoria," this coming to us from 44, "Victoria," said Tristram after a while. "Yes, Tristram," said Victoria, who had been preoccupied for much of the walk. "Would you think it forward of me to kiss you?" asked Tristram. "Yes," said Victoria bluntly and coldly, "very forward. Like father, like son, they are very awkward with the kissy faces, aren't they?" One bumbler to another. On page 38, slightly before this, "Every boy in the village was in love with Victoria Forrester, and many a sedate gentleman quietly married with gray in his beard would stare at her as she walked down the street, becoming for a few moments a boy once more in the spring of his years, with a spring in his step." Hashtag Neil Gaiman is canceled. Moving on. This is moving backwards, actually, into the text. This coming to us from page 37. I'm going to reread the part that I read earlier, and it changes a little bit with the following paragraph. It has a little bit more implication. When he was 15, he hurt his arm falling from the apple tree outside Mr. Thomas Forrester's house, more specifically from the apple tree outside Miss Victoria Forrester's bedroom window. To Tristram's regret, he had caught no more than a pink and tantalizing glimpse of Victoria. I'm not sure where that pink is going, by the way, who was his sister's age and without any doubt the most beautiful girl for 100 miles around. Moving forward, by the time Victoria was 17, and Tristram also was in all probability, he was certain the most beautiful girl in the British Isles. Tristram would have insisted on the most beautiful girl in the entire British Empire, if not the world, and boxed you, or prepared to, had you argued with him. You would have been hard-pressed to find anyone in Wall who would have argued with him, though she turned many heads and, in all probability, broke many hearts. It is important to notice the difference between Tristram and his father. I don't remember the young woman's name in chapter 1 who worked in the bar and was very attractive. Maybe it was Victoria's mother. It's beyond me at this moment, but she was the most beautiful woman on all of Wall. The woman with which Dunstan had made the hubba hubba was the most beautiful woman he had ever met. Dunstan went with Miss Plain Daisy. So here we have Tristram parting from the ways of his father and choosing at least to pursue the gorgeous one, for whatever that's worth. On this same page, just a weird little thing that's happening here, because Neil Gaiman is really playing with expectation, and he doesn't seem to have much care for age differences between love interests. The village of the school was a fine school, and under the tutelage of Miss Cherry, the school mistress, Tristram Thorne learned all about fractions and longitude and latitude, and could ask in French for the pen of the gardener's aunt. Indeed, for the pen of his own aunt. He learned the kings and queens of England from William the Conqueror, 1066, to Victoria, 1037. He learned his reading and had a fair copperplate hand. Travelers to the village were rare, but occasionally a peddler would come along through the village selling penny dreadful accounts of grisly murders and fateful encounters, dire things, remarkable escapes. Most peddlers sold song sheets too for a penny, and families would buy them and gather them for their pianos to sing songs such as Cherry Ripe and In My Father's Garden. It is weird to me that Tristram is under the tutelage of Miss Cherry, and in the same very paragraph, we have to hear about songs such as Cherry Ripe. There are weird little sexual innuendos sort of throughout this novel so far, and we're only 54 pages in. So I think those things are worth accumulating on a side tally as we go. But also in this paragraph, we have that little peddlers would come through the village selling penny dreadful accounts of grisly murders, fateful encounters, dire doings, and remarkable escapes. It is the penny dreadful in chapter 2 that replaces the literary reference of Oliver Twist in chapter 1. So where are we going there? Are we sort of spiraling from the mundane outwards? I'm not sure exactly what's happening there, but it is, I think, at least worth remembering. But one of the main points that we've got to talk about in this chapter, I've already screwed the pooch and mentioned it earlier, on page 35. Where am I at here? I'm sorry. Page 35. Shortly afterward, the farm cat had 3 kittens, two black and white ones like herself, and a tiny kitten with a dusty blue sheen to her coat and eyes that changed color depending on her mood, from green and gold to salmon, scarlet, and vermilion. This kitten was given to Tristan to make up for missing the market. Which kitten? Not the ones that were black and white like herself, not the ones that were black and white like the mother, but the tiny kitten with a dusty blue sheen to her coat and eyes that changed color depending on her mood. The outcast, the one that's a little different looking than the other kittens. 2 paragraphs later, his mother said nothing to him about the matter, as she said little to him on any subject. There seems to be something cold and icy between the two of them. Sometimes Tristan would look up and see his mother staring at him intently, as if she were trying to tease some secret from his face. Sort of a weird thing going on there. But we get on 36 a little description of Tristan. The shape of his Louisa, his sister, would needle him about this as they walked to the village school in the morning, as she would goad him about so many other things. The shape of his ears, for example. The right ear was flat against his head and almost pointed. The left one was not. I think you know where we're going with this. Tristan does not appear to be the son of the woman who has raised him. These whispers that the guards had heard about young Tristan, maybe, like we assumed at the end of last chapter, Tristan is not the son of Dunstan and, oh golly, now I'm blanking on, oh man, Daisy, plain Daisy. Maybe Tristan is not the son of Dunstan and plain Daisy, but is instead the son of Dunstan and the girl from the fairy market. It appears so. What's the implication here? First off, Daisy's daughter, kind of a bitch. Does she take after her mom? There's a strange coldness between Tristan and Daisy. But mightn't there be? Mightn't that be natural? Now, how would we treat this story if it were the story of a man raising a child that he had been hoodwinked into believing was his own? Often, that is the story that we get. The story of a woman who had cheated. I don't mean often this happens. I mean, often when the only time we get the story of someone being hoodwinked into raising a kid that's not their own is the story of a man being hoodwinked into raising another man's child because she had been mischievous behind his back. Of course, there's no real way. In the world we inhabit, there's no way for the woman to be tricked into raising a kid that's not her own. But it can happen to a man. And there is some feeling of indignation about that, right? That's not a very honest thing to do. Dunstan seems to know Tristan is not Daisy's son. Seems to be absolutely sure of it. He knows the whispers. He understands why these strange physical features might be present on his son. And he gives young Dunstan that snowflake to send him off into the woods, send him off through the land of fairy. The last thing that I think is pretty obvious. There are tensions there and why that dynamic exists. The last thing that I think is sort of worth talking about here the young lovers twain, right? Victoria works at Hooters against her parents' wishes. Tristan is going off into lands unknown against his parents' wishes. It is necessary to observe the rebellious nature of both of these kids. Now, it might be contended that, hey, he's writing adolescence as Neil Gaiman here. He's writing adolescence, so of course he's going to be writing about rebellious youth, right? This was not the case in Chapter 1, and explicitly not the case. Daisy, plain Daisy, was every bit as boring as your neighbor's uncarved pumpkin, right? That was Daisy. Tristan was the humble young fellow who was every bit as plain Daisy, with his plain brown hair and his plain brown freckles and his plain brown eyes, until a little bit of magic walked into his life. So, is this a tale of like meeting like? And Tristan seems to have been as unrebellious as his parents, being bullied by his younger sister of all things, being bullied seemingly all the days of his life. That was Tristan's lot in life, until a little bit of magic walked in, that shooting star, while he walked Victoria home. In fact, it was a strange breeze that came through the shop. Under this breeze was Tristan tempted to suggest walking Daisy home that night, or walking Victoria home that night. So that was magic. And he's walking Victoria home and gets to the hubba hubbas. Then he sees a falling star. A little bit of magic there, right? Promises to grab that shooting star and bring it back for Victoria. The implication of magic. This is a magical quest, much in the same way that Dunstan had a magical quest to return to the fairy market that night, and it was during that night that he had a little hubba hubba of himself, of his own. Not of himself, that's a different story. So Victoria had been the rebellious one. And in his act of rebellion is when he pursues magic and becomes someone who might have something to offer to Victoria. Victoria being the one who says, "Little shop boy, what are you going to offer me?" And how degrading can this lady be, huh? Little shop boy. Think we'll have some stuff to talk about that later. Maybe. It seems that when he returns, he's going to have this star, we have to assume. How will Victoria treat him then? That is all that I have for this week's installment of Stardust, the second of a 12-part series. I hope to see you back here next time for Chapter 3.